never actually done a talk in my whole life before, so this will be new. So what I thought I would do, since we've got half an hour, and I imagine a lot of people in here will have very high quality, interesting questions, I figured I'd talk for 15 minutes and then we'd have a discussion with questions and answers for 15 minutes. So if I say anything that surprises you very much, just keep it in mind and you can ask about it. So thank you very much for your lovely introduction. It is true that I started off life as a Jehovah's Witness, and even if you don't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses, I guess we all know about conservative religions and the sort of things they tend to want to limit their members doing. So, I mean, I guess like a lot of us with any kind of religious background, I grew up with a very strong impression that the only kind of sex that was acceptable was married, heterosexual, missionary. Jehovah's Witnesses banned oral sex for reasons, I mean, when I found that out, I didn't know what oral sex was. And then when I found out many years later, I thought, why would you ban that? And I don't know what the justification was for it. I spoke to another Jehovah's Witness recently, and he said he thought it was because they said it would promote being gay. Who knows? Anyway, so I grew up in this very strict religious sect, especially when it came to, I think, gender roles and sexuality. And my family actually left the Jehovah's Witnesses, so I'm lucky in that regard. They left when I was 13, and they became regular Christians, which was, I guess, a little bit less, probably. But still, I mean, still, at least in the 1990s, when I was growing up as a Baptist at this point, and being gay was still seen as wrong. You couldn't be in the church if you were gay. So it's not as though it was exactly really inclusive. And so then, like, what actually happened to me to make me realise that I was kinky was in the book, and I can't speak about it in real life because it makes me cry. So I'll tell you like a very gentle version of it, because I realised that sadomasochism was a thing like a few weeks before. There was a Conservative member of Parliament who killed himself by mistake doing a autoerotic asphyxiation thing. I think his name was Stephen Milligan.
Yeah.
And I was 16 when this happened, and my sixth form college had all the newspapers out every day for us to read, and the papers were full of like just mocking storylines about, oh, this weird man did this weird thing, he's a sadomasochist. I mean, and he died, but they were basically, as far as I could see, just laughing at him. And I thought, if anyone ever finds out about what I'm into, that's what they'll do to me. And I thought, okay, I'll never tell anyone this. This will be like the biggest secret of my life. I will never tell anyone. I will be normal. And it's weird to suddenly sense that I'm in a room full of people like talking about it. Because, of course, as we've, I'm sure, all discovered, thank God, that it's not just a few of us. There's quite a few of us, actually. I think it's maybe about 10% of us. When I look at statistics, it seems to vary quite a lot, what it comes out with, but I think it's like 1 in 10 of us. And I wish I'd known that at 16, and I guess looking at the ages of people in here, I guess a lot of us did grow up pre-internet, so unless we were really lucky at stumbling over kinky stuff, I guess a lot of us went through something similar of thinking we were completely alone for the early portion of our life. So I've always done things kind of by extremes. So in my desperate effort to suppress my interest in BDSM, I thought, well, what's kind of the opposite of that I can do to show myself that I'm okay? And I joined the campaign against pornography. I was 16 and I'd never seen any pornography except for page 3. So I didn't know what I was campaigning against, but I figured that the campaign against pornography were talking about how porn degraded women, and I thought, well, if all my fantasies are about being degraded as a woman, I suppose the best thing I can do is campaign against the degradation of women. So I became like very angry, big teenage feminist, and I used to get this literature through the post from the campaign against pornography that used to tell me about porn videos. So I was reading stuff that was completely opening my eyes because they were describing the plot of all these porn films. And I was very shocked because I thought I was campaigning against, tits in newspapers. And then I realized, wow, there's a really big problem. There's videos where women are getting tied up. And I kept reading because it was fascinating. And then remembering, oh yes, I'm campaigning against this. And so by the time I was in my early 20s and I got through drama school, I was incredibly confused because my fantasies hadn't gone away and all my fantasies were about being a submissive woman, like to a dominant man. And the way I was presenting myself in the world was the absolute opposite because I was trying to hide. So I kept attracting very submissive men because I'd succeeded so well in suppressing all of that interest. And then I started modelling because I was really poor as an actor, and I thought maybe if I do a bit of modelling, I can survive in London. And my second ever photographer, who worked with me at the Beehive Studios in Camden, which is gone now, he invited me to a gallery after the shoot. And I was very excited by that idea because I'd only been a model 2 days, so I'd not been to any exhibitions. I was like, wow, that feels like a professional model glamorous thing to do. So I went along to this exhibition, and it was being run by the Association of Erotic Artists, who I did not know about. And I walked through the door and the whole gallery was full of BDSM images. And I honestly hadn't known that there was anyone else, except for Stephen Milligan, who was dead. And suddenly to be in a room full of the artwork that was expressing all the stuff that I'd been fantasizing. Come in. No, you're fine. That I'd been fantasizing about all my life. So suddenly there was all this work on the walls. And then I realized there's all these people in here. And these people, I guess, are into this stuff. And so I went round and started talking to people. And a lot of, as I now realize, a lot of the artists will be there at an exhibition because they'll be standing with their work. So I started meeting photographers and artists who did BDSM work. So by the time I left that evening, I was a BDSM model because I started getting bookings. And it still feels like the most extreme possible day in my life because I went from not knowing any of it existed at all to having bookings to go and represent it in artwork that was going to be seen by the public. And the power of doing that for me, just, you can't be ashamed of it if you're putting it out onto the internet. And the more I did of that, the more of my image tied up or being spanked or whatever it was I was doing, the more of those images appeared in public, the less shame I felt. And so I just kept doing it, and I've been doing it 20 years. And I started to then get fan mail from people who felt similar to me. And I realized that the work I was producing, that I was producing to try to make myself feel less ashamed, was making other people feel less ashamed as well. And 20 years on, I still witness a lot of hatred and stigma towards people who shoot any kind of porn. Because there's a lot of talk from some types of feminists, at least, about it being kind of useless, it not contributing anything, it actually causing damage. And I wouldn't want to say that no types of porn create any kind of damage. I'm sure some porn has been bad for some people, but my experience of it has been so endlessly positive. And I can't really imagine having got through my life and got to where I am without having access to porn that just told me I wasn't alone. But it feels to me like the most valuable thing I can really do, given my skills. I can't go and solve medical things because I don't have the skills. So the thing I can do is I can keep trying to destigmatize BDSM. So, having modelled for 15 years by the point I started beginning to work on my book, I thought, well, I think I've exposed a lot of men to how I think. I wonder if I can do something that might reach some women as well, because I'm aware that that writing a book, it's much more likely to be read by women than just producing more porn, which I know is primarily, at least the porn I do, is primarily viewed by men. So I decided to write a book, and I decided to tell my story. My publicist told me what I had to talk about, which is the book. I meant to tell you about my approach to writing.
Just get that bit out of the way and then you're done.
So I'm going to tell you about my approach to writing, because I'd never written a book. And if anyone happens to be in here because they are thinking of writing a book, I suppose I can at least share what I learned having never done it before. Because I hadn't written a book, but I read lots of books. So I thought, I guess I'll just write the sort of book that I would like to read. And given that it was my story, I just thought, I think what I'll do is I'll just be 100% honest, which sounds really simple, and it's really hard, because I found myself writing stuff because it sounded nice, and then crossing it out because actually it was worse than that. So I thought, no, I should share what really happened, not the nice version. And sometimes I wrote things that made me sound quite good, and then I remembered that's not really how it happened. I better write the real truth. So I kept on erasing stuff and writing again until I knew I was telling the absolute truth. And I knew I told the truth mostly when it made me cry. And maybe I'm just someone who cries very easily. But it did occur to me that you know when you've written the truth because you have some emotional response to it. And it was such a pleasure. And although I'm sure not everyone wants the whole world to read their story, I do definitely, if you've ever had any kind of shame or any feelings like that about your life or your kinks, the experience of writing it down, it forces you to come to terms with what you are in a way that even in 20 years of being a BDSM model, I never really had thoroughly before. And I found it a very cathartic it is one word and it's true, it was cathartic, but I also found it remarkably empowering, because once you've written it, you're telling yourself, yes, this is who I am, this is what I am, and I'm not going to hide from it at all anymore. So I definitely recommend trying it. If you've got even the beginning of an idea that you might like to put it on paper, I certainly feel stronger for having done it. So then I had a finished book, and I thought I would get an agent, and it turned out to be really hard. And it showed me that there is still a pretty massive stigma about being a sex worker of any kind, because I wrote to loads of feminist, female, young agents who said they were looking for marginalised voices. And they weren't looking for my marginalised voice, I can tell you. So I found an agent eventually, and then all the publishers said no. And then I found a publisher eventually, but I had to crowdfund. And then I thought, well, that's where I'll really see what this community is made of. Like, I will see if people are really just here to see my free porn pictures, or whether they are actually going to support a book that maybe might make a little bit of a difference to at least a few people. And I can say that this community was amazing. And so it got crowdfunded really, really fast. It came out last week. And here I am promoting it. So if anyone would like a copy, I have books, and I have my own card reader that's contactless, which is the most exciting thing about the whole process.
Do you happen to know how many people actually did crowdfund in the end?
Yes, 720 people crowdfunded it, and they're all in the back.
They're all in the back, including me.
Except for the people who didn't want to be on it because they were ashamed. And that actually was almost the most interesting thing of all, that loads of people supported the book. It was amazing. It was funded in 5 weeks, which was, I'd been given 6 months to do it. So it was an amazing community effort. But so many people had to write to me and say, I'm really sorry, I don't dare have my real name in the back. And you know, having your name in the back of a book in a long list is a very small thing, but I totally know why they didn't dare have their real name. And it's because there's still a stigma. And so I just hope that between me and the people who write books like me, and the people who read these books, and the people who are brave enough to come to events like this, not wearing a mask, it feels like between us all, we can hopefully gradually change things. And I know I can't do much on my own with one book, but if I can be part of a body of people who write books along the same lines, then hopefully in 10 years' time, 18-year-old kinky people might have an easier ride than a lot of us did, and that's really my hope. So I feel as though I have talked for 17 minutes, and obviously I can carry on forever, but I would love to hear anyone's questions. So please do go ahead if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. I would much rather answer you than just talk.
Quick question then. Which took longer, writing the book or getting it out?
Getting it out! Oh my God! Writing it took 6 weeks. Like, because it turned out I loved it. So I go and shoot all day, like model, and then I get to my hotel and I find I couldn't sleep because I just got this story that was desperately wanting to come out of me. So I just stay up and write. And of course you couldn't do that for very long, but for 6 weeks I found that I could, because it was so exciting. And yeah, then the process of trying to get it published took 4 years. And I think one of the things I'm really hopeful about is that now that I know how to do it, future writers, if they come and ask me, I might be able to help them skip at least a couple of those years, because now I realise I did a lot of things wrong trying to get it published because I didn't know. I ended up asking people who were never going to help. So if anyone ever wants to write a BDSM memoir or similar, just email me and I'll do my best to at least save you the 2 years of having people write back and say no, because it's horrific. Does anyone have anything else to ask?
You said you read a lot of books. I mean, is that just mainstream books or erotica? Or?
I kind of read everything. I like erotica a lot. I was quite slow on the uptake to find erotica because, again, like Jehovah's Witness and Christian background, I didn't know it existed. And then when I found it, I read nothing but erotica for a couple of years. It was when I started modelling, and it's just like the whole world opened up to me. So I started doing BDSM at shoots, and I started reading about it in books. And I think for kind of a year of my life, that's sort of all I did. But I'm a really big fan of memoir as well, which is kind of helpful given that I wanted to write one.
I was going to say as well, because Erica Scott wrote a book, like Blue,
Yes, I love it.
Very similar kind of
Yes.
feel.
Yeah. Have you read my book?
Not yet.
That's okay.
All right, putting someone on the spot. Depends on who's read the book.
No, I love her book. So a few other books I recommend are Lake Bloomer. I love Gillian Keenan's Sex with Shakespeare, which is also a memoir. I like Nikki Flynn's Dances with Werewolves, which came out about 15 years ago, I think. So there are a handful of books that are a little similar. But I discovered publishers are obviously still super frightened of the idea. So it feels like there could do with being more. Would anyone like to ask anything else? Yes. Martin. Martin?
I am indeed.
Right.
Thank you.
Well,
Firstly, you said this was the first time you've done something like this.
Yeah.
You never know it. You're an absolute natural, and
Right.
I hope you will. Not.
thank you. Thank you.
You answered my first question, which was going to be about the process of writing, so thank you for that. I guess another question that occurred to me, though, you strike me as being very self-aware in
Thank
many
you. I'm
respects.
trying.
I just wondered if the process of writing the book, actually getting the book out there, did you learn anything about yourself by the end of it that you didn't know?
I did, and I think maybe we all would. It feels like maybe just writing a book kind of as therapy would teach us all something. Because what I learned about myself, and I like it, I mean, I can see it's not the most agreeable trait, because I just discovered I wouldn't give up. Once I got a book that people were saying no to, I just realised I can't give up, because the more people say no, the more angry I am that my story is not being seen as acceptable, because they've not read it. They were saying no to it based on the covering letter. And that just made me so cross. And now I realise, wow, I guess whatever I decide to do, I probably won't let go, even if I really should. So yeah, I'm not sure it's 100% a good thing, but I'm interested to discover that about myself. Yes, thank you. I think, yes.
You wrote a book about recipe.
Yes, I did.
Did that help in your second book?
No, because I actually wrote it afterwards. So I'd written most of Playing to Lose before lockdown.
Yeah.
So then I wrote some additional chapters. So then lockdown happened, and that's when I wrote the baking book, just for something to do. And so no, unfortunately, it didn't. It was really fun to do it, but no. Like when I look back at my book, I didn't write it in chronological order. I wrote it in order of how much I wanted to write each chapter. So I wrote the one I wanted most, and then if I didn't really want a chapter, if I didn't want to write it, I often just picked it out and replaced it with a chapter I did want to write. So my first chapter, when I look back at them, I could see that I was learning how to write, really. So I rewrote quite a lot of the first 3 or 4 chapters, and then it's like as I read through the book and I see the chapters that I wrote most recently, I can see that I definitely had learned to write a bit more like an adult by the time I was doing that. Yeah.
And I like how you write when you're reading your book, you kind of introduce the next chapter.
Thank you. I think I stole that from Dan Brown. It's the thing I discovered that I don't know if proper writers are like this, but certainly I feel like every book I read by every author, it's like it taught me something, and I just stole it and put it in my book.
That's called art.
Thank
That's what
you.
artists do.
I like that idea a lot because I did.
Do you have plans for a second one?
I do. Unfortunately, I have multiple plans. So what I need is for someone to tell me, because I'm a sub. I need someone to tell me. I want someone to tell me which one I should do first, basically. So I might do a Twitter poll, or I'm sort of hoping that someone in the publishing side of things might say, those 3 won't sell and this one will, because I'd like to write all of them, and I probably will, but I'm not sure which one to do next. So there's either like a piece of erotic fiction that I'd really like to do, or something a little bit like Bridget Jones' Diary but kinky, which is also, that's also somewhat erotic. I'd like to write a book called Kink Revolution that is about kind of what happened next, what I learned through 20 years of being kinky. And there's another one, which is my favourite, which no one will want to read. It's called Ariel Anderson's Bad Ideas, and it's all the terrible things I did that I didn't have space for in my first book, because there were loads. So yes, those. Have I got time for any more?
You have?
Yes, I do. I have 5 more minutes. Does anyone else have a question?
What you say you write the chapters in the order of how important they were to you. So what was the first chapter you said that's the most important thing? That's what I want to write about.
The first one I wrote was the first chapter because I was trying to find my feet. But then I jumped straight to when I was when I left drama school and I was living with my horrible boyfriend in the flat on Hanger Lane roundabout. So it's a very weird
On the
jump.
Hanger Lane gyratory.
Yeah, that's right, exactly where I was. I think I described it very lovingly in my book. That it was like everything was bright orange all night because the lights never went out. It was amazing. And then I jumped into, I was in hospital and I decided to write one of the sexy chapters about pain. And so it was a very, very uneven way of writing, but I totally recommend it because often by the time I got as far as writing chapters that I kind of put off because they didn't seem very interesting, I just had a better idea for skipping that bit of the story and writing something that was more interesting, either to me or to potential readers, or I think more often to both. Because one thing I discovered that's really nice about memoir is you don't actually have to tell people everything if something was done. I was trying to write about my wedding, and I thought, like, there's nothing in my wedding that is special to anyone who doesn't know me. And I just thought I could just skip this and I can just say we got married in 2012. And that was like a nice revelation. And so every time I got to a boring bit, I thought, yeah, I'll just jump it.
The chapter where you actually describe getting together with Helen was the chapter that moved me the most.
Thank you.
That posted on Twitter actually made me cry. I thought,
Oh,
it really is
Thank you.
very moving and fantastic.
He really hates me writing about him. Because he's my husband. I tried to write about him as little as possible because he really likes his privacy and he's married a terrible woman from that point of view. So I tried to talk about him as little as possible, but it meant that the little I was doing, I really wanted people to understand, like, why, as a submissive woman, a really kind of quiet man who knows what he wants and is just sort of centered and isn't always trying to show off to everyone why that might be like a really appealing idea, and it really was.
That's partly the answer to my next question. I'm going to say, are you comfortable in writing books that really go deep into relationships, like maybe 9.5 weeks style?
Like
That's
I am, yeah. It feels like I need a special partner for that who's very comfortable with me doing stuff like that. So I think probably the answer is writing fiction, isn't it?
Big fiction.
Yeah. So I've been writing like erotic fiction that I've not shared much of. There's one of my short stories on Girl on the Next blog that just came out last week, but all of the rest of it is unpublished, and I love it. It took ages to be comfortable enough to do it. Because actually, even in my memoir, which isn't massively erotic, I have to admit, even if you were going to buy it because you thought it was, it's not got loads of actual sex. Even that, at first I found it really difficult. Which, given that I'm a nude model, it's funny that it felt so exposing to write about actual stuff I've done, whereas I'm happy doing that stuff, but talking about it felt like a lot more exposing. So yes, I think now I feel like I could probably do a decent job of writing proper sex scenes, but I think maybe I needed to write my memoir to get to that point. Sorry, I took the time. We need to stop.
We have to finish. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ariel. She has copies of her book. I think probably because we've got a workshop.
Yeah,
there's
shall I
a big
go through
workshop.
that?
So I think probably if anyone wants to sign